If you love the great outdoors, Glacier National Park has got to be on your bucket list. With over 700 miles of trails and spectacular views, it's no wonder it's called the Hikers National Park. Located in the northwest corner of Montana, Glacier is for the adventurous who want to explore the wilderness on foot, by boat, or even on horseback. Record attendance over the last few years has brought traffic and parking issues to sites near the spectacular Going to the Sun Road, and the rooms and rustic lodges must be booked several months or even a year in advance. But you don't come here for the accommodations. You come here for the amazing trails, the animals, and the incredible scenery. You come here to hike to one of the remaining glaciers, or to hike on the Continental Divide Trail. Photographers love Glacier for the wildlife, for the variety of landscapes, and the dramatic greens, reds, and blues. On a personal note, Glacier is my favorite park, and I've been to most of them. And I've been going to Glacier almost every year since 1994. Which compelled me to write this 90-minute documentary/travel guide. The goal of this show is not just to show you how beautiful the park is. My real goal is to compel you to come here for yourself, to drive the Sun Road, to explore the backcountry, to cruise or paddle its lakes, and of course to hike the trails that make Glacier the Hikers National Park. In this program, I'm going to take you step by step on many of the most popular trails in the park. I'll show you its lodges and motor inns. And for those not into the rustic accommodations, I'll even show you where the posh people stay. The park has plenty of alpine trails, but the passes here top out at 67 to about 7,500 feet, so it takes very little time to acclimate to hiking in Glacier. There's even flat trails, and some of these are just as spectacular as the high ones. I'll take you on those as well. Some of the trails are long, some are quite short. And some go past many of the waterfalls in the park, and I'm going to take you there too. Most people see the park from the Going to the Sun Road, and that's where we're going to begin. Most people see the park by driving across one of the most scenic stretches of pavement in North America. It's called the Going to the Sun Road. We begin our 52-mile journey on the east side, near St. Mary's. The east side is much drier than the west, and there are fewer trees to block the glacial carved scenery. These shots were taken shortly after sunrise. As we head west, the road is sandwiched between Two Dog Flats on our right and St. Mary's Lake on the left. A sign at one of the many turnouts points to a very unique mountain. Water from this small minor peak flows to 3 different oceans: the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. The power of ice is plain to see above Two Dog Flats. Millions of years ago, this area was a shallow sea, and sediment collected over eons. More recently, several large glaciers have come and gone. The last one receded more than 12,000 years ago, and when it did, it revealed millions of years of Earth's history. This relatively flat section is excellent wildlife habitat. Shortly after sunrise, herds of elk come down the mountain and towards the lake. Bears and other predators also tend to drink at the lake in the morning. Never approach a bear, and don't get out of your car. It's much safer to see them through the window. Stop at one of the many turnouts and take a look around. A short trail from the Sun Point parking lot leads to St. Mary's Lake. This sign warns that mountain lions have been in the area recently, so you need to be alert. This is the view of the lake, again, just after sunrise. Look carefully, and you might just spot one of the smaller mammals in the park, like this alpine squirrel. A few miles down the road is one of the most photographed locations in Glacier National Park. It's the Wild Goose Island viewpoint. This spot should be visited often. The view changes throughout the day. In the morning, it's dramatic. It's serene in the afternoon. And in the evening, it's spiritual. Just past Wild Goose Island, the road begins to climb, providing an excellent view of St. Mary's Lake. A few miles later is Sunrift Gorge. This stream is just off the road. If you're ready for a little exercise, get out and take the trailhead to Bering, St. Mary's, or Virginia Falls. The road cuts through a variety of colorful geology. In places, it's a more typical dull gray or pale yellow. But then a few miles away, it's bright green. And after that, a deep red. Near the pass, it cuts through the black band. The reason for the diversity is fascinating and explained well in roadside geology books available in the gift shop. As the road climbs, the forest gets thicker. The alpine portion of the road begins at the Jackson Glacier Overlook. This is the largest glacier in the park, but this one, like all others in the park, is predicted to disappear in the next decade or two. The higher up you go, the more twisty the road becomes. At Lunch Creek, when the weather is nice, there's another great photo op. As the road gets higher, the views become more spectacular. It's very hard to capture the true majesty of the scenery. It's one of those places you really have to see in person to fully appreciate. There are tunnels on either side of Logan Pass. This is the East Tunnel. It's just below the pass. During certain times of day, cyclists are allowed to share the road. There are a surprising number of riders who complete the route. And it's even more amazing because from west to east, there is more than 3,000 feet of elevation change. Logan Pass is the highest part of the road. The Visitor Center is a very popular spot, and it's a good idea to get here early because the parking lot is often full by noon. You can also get here by Red Bus, as several tours stop here. The Visitor Center houses several exhibits, a small gift shop, and a comfort station. Hiker shuttles stop here to both pick up and drop off those interested in hiking one of the many trails in the area. Just behind the Visitor Center, the 3-mile round-trip Hidden Lake Trail is one of the most popular. Here, grizzlies and other wildlife are often seen. In fact, it's not uncommon for the trail to be closed because of too much grizzly activity. On this day, there were only goats. This is Hidden Lake. The symbol of the park is bighorn sheep. They can often be seen in or near the parking lot. The weather changes quickly up here. It can be warm and pleasant in the valley, while it's cold and raining or even sleeting or snowing at the pass. Clouds rush in from the west and are pushed upwards by the mountains. Cold precipitation is often the result. Meanwhile, east of the divide, only a few clouds spill over the ridge. Most just evaporate in the drier air of the east. Just west of the pass, the road begins to descend as it crosses a fall. Near the fall, a short iron walkway provides access to an overlook. This view shows the Highline Trail just above the Sun Road. The road is carved into the garden wall. The descent is narrow, a bit twisty, and seemingly always under construction. But there are plenty of pullouts where you can stop and take in the magnificent views. Just west of the pass is Bird Woman Falls. It's one of the highest falls in the park. At 460 feet, it's still dwarfed by the mountains. Heaven's Peak is one of the better-known mountains along the Sun Road. Construction delays present an opportunity to spend a little time looking at it. Stop in the large parking area called the Loop. In 2003, much of this area burned in a forest fire that closed the park for much of the summer. Fire is an important part of a healthy forest life cycle. Without them, there would be little new growth. This 2010 video shows how the forest is recovering. The West Tunnel is just below the Loop. A window in the tunnel provides a striking view of Heaven's Peak. Avalanches are common as temperatures rise in the spring. Here, the power of an avalanche is clear to see. Each spring, several avalanches occur along the length of the road. Cleaning them up is one reason why the road doesn't open until mid to late June. The road eventually levels out and follows the contour of McDonald Creek. Soon, you'll see another large parking area. It's for the Trail of the Cedars. It's one of the most popular places in the park. Here, a boarded 0.7-mile wheelchair-accessible trail winds its way through an old-growth cedar forest. At the far end, you'll hear the sound of falling water. It's Avalanche Creek, where it narrows into a small but beautiful gorge. It's hard to believe that an area so lush, like this temperate rainforest, is less than 40 miles away from the dry grasslands of Two Dog Flats. The road continues west along McDonald Creek. Several parking areas provide access to McDonald Creek. This is one of the creek's many cascades. It was shot in the fall when the water was low. In the spring, it's a raging torrent. The creek empties into Lake McDonald. This lake is the largest in the park. It's about 10 miles long. Lake McDonald Lodge is on its southeastern shore. The 2003 fire burned much of the forest on the far side of the lake. By the time you've reached the western end of Lake McDonald, you've been exploring the Sun Road for about 2.5 hours. So if it's time for a break and maybe a snack, stop in the town of Apgar. Here there is lodging, shops, and a nice diner. The Going to the Sun Road ends a few miles later, at West Glacier. Since 1932, the 52-mile Going to the Sun Road has allowed visitors to see the prairie as it meets the mountains. It's allowed them to see spectacular glacier-carved valleys, as well as the largest glacier in the park. At the top, you cross one of the most scenic passes in North America and see animals that live there. On the west side, you witness the rebirth of a forest. And you've walked through an old-growth cedar forest. The Going to the Sun Road is one reason the park is called the Crown of the Continent. Here's a postscript. The Sun Road is constantly being maintained. When workers are on duty, there can be delays of about 30 minutes on each side of the pass. The park website provides good road status information, but there is no internet access in the park, and there's poor cell phone coverage. Ask a ranger at the park entrance for the latest construction news. One of the challenges of hiking in Glacier National Park is adjusting to the altitude. Lake McDonald on the west side of the park is a little more than 3,100 feet above sea level. The floor of the mini glacier area on the east side of the park is over 4,900 feet above sea level. Many of the trails and mountain passes reach between 6,600 feet and 7,200 feet. That may not seem too high for those used to Colorado, but flatlanders will have to get used to the altitude. Hiking a trail with lots of elevation gain on the first day in the mountains is not a good idea. To help your body adjust, spend your first day exploring the Sun Road or hiking a flat trail. One of the best flat hikes in the park is the Bullhead Lake Trail. It's in the mini glacier area. The trailhead is located near the Swift Current Motor Inn parking lot. The trail begins in trees. One is rather unique. After about 5 minutes, a spur trail leads to Fisher Cap Lake. Moose live in this area, and they feed in the lake nearly every day. Some say that most of the images of moose you've seen in nature calendars were taken at this lake. They feed on plants that grow in shallow water. The females tend to feed in groups for up to hours at a time, providing plenty of time for photographers to get a nice shot. They train their young to hide in the nearby brush. Moose move methodically in the water, but they can move quickly when they want to. Moose are the largest members of the deer family. This is clearly apparent when they get on shore. They are accustomed to people, but they are still wild, and you shouldn't get too close. Bulls tend to feed by themselves. The best time to see them is late afternoon to early evening. Bears tend to come down here around dusk, so it'd be a good idea to be off the trail by then. Deer also feed here, in the nearby woods, and near the shore. A few minutes further down the main trail, there's an interesting green rock formation. In places, berries grow along the trail. They are a favorite food of bears. So where there are berries, there eventually will be bears to eat them. Talking, singing, or making any noise that sounds human is a good idea when walking in bear country. About 1.5 miles from the trailhead, you're at the eastern end of Red Rock Lake. It's another third of a mile to Red Rock Falls. From time to time, the trail heads through trees. If you're alert, you may be lucky enough to see a moose. It's hard to believe that such a large animal can be so difficult to see. The trail goes through dense growth, and even moose get tired of bushwhacking through it. Occasionally, they take to the trail. Give them the right of way. Just before the falls, the geology gets bizarre again. Just imagine the forces required to fold and bend this rock formation. Also notice that earlier the rock was green. Here it's red. Rangers frequently walk the trail looking for signs of bears. Anything out there of any interest?
Well, fleeting sighting of a grizzly.
This ranger was warning hikers that a grizzly was using the trail to get over the mountains via Swift Current Pass. Red Rock Falls is at the 1.8 mile point. This is a favorite spot for families. There are plenty of rocks for kids to climb on. So far, the trail has gained only about 100 feet. It's another spectacular 1.5 miles to Bullhead Lake. The trail gains about 300 feet as it follows Swift Current Creek. The lake appears to be 2 lakes, but the 2 pools are connected by a narrow channel. This is the first pool. At one point, if you look back, you can see the mini Glacier Hotel. Those are moose tracks in the water. The larger Bullhead Lake pool is about 3.5 miles from the trailhead. It's one of the most tranquil places in the park. Here you're surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. At the valley's end, there are 3,000-foot waterfalls. There's another oddly bent rock formation, where mountain goats sometimes feed. The lake is clear and blue. Primitive life can also be seen on this trail. The yellow and green blotches on these rocks are alive. They are lichen. Lichen grows very slowly. These blotches are likely to be hundreds of years old. For most, Bullhead Lake is the turnaround point. But the trail continues. 2,000 feet up and 3.5 miles from here is Swift Current Pass. And beyond that, Granite Park Chalet. The view from Swift Current Pass is my favorite view in the park. When you're in the mountains, it's only natural that you want to hike them. But this trail is proof that short, flat hikes can be just as memorable as a long, steep one. There are too many waterfalls in Glacier National Park to even count. They seem to be around every corner. The best way to get close to some of the best in the park is by taking the Falls hike off the Going to the Sun Road. There are 2 trailheads, and they're about 9 to 9.5 miles from the east entrance of the Sun Road. There are 3 falls on the 6-mile loop, with only 300 feet of up and down. The trailhead with the largest parking area is near Sun Rift Gorge, which is cut by Bering Creek, which flows under the Sun Road, towards the valley floor and Bering Falls. From here you can go all the way to Gunsight Pass and beyond. Bering Falls is just about 1/3 of a mile and about 300 feet below the road. Several trails meander through the area, so it's important to follow the signposts, especially on the way back. You don't want to end up at the wrong trailhead when your car is parked at the other one. I've done this. And then you gotta walk along the road and it's not fun. After just a few minutes on the trail, you can hear the falls. When you cross the narrow log bridge, you can feel the mist from the falls. On a hot day, this is a great place to cool off. But on a cool and rainy day like this one, the falls run higher and look a little bit better. If you're bold enough to cross the frigid water of the creek, you can actually get next to the falls. When you're done exploring, it's time to head to the next fall on the trail, St. Mary's. To get there, you go back the way you came, until the fork in the trail. Then, follow the arrow on the signpost for about a mile. The best view of St. Mary Falls is from the bridge. The 2-tiered fall cut through the red rock, providing a nice contrast with a slight blue cast of the glacial meltwater. The blue color is caused by rock particles scraped off by tons of ice. It's another mile down the valley to Virginia Falls. If you haven't read your guidebook, you might think this is it, but it's not. This terrific spot is an unnamed multi-tier cascade. It certainly deserves a name, because it's at least as photogenic as the main falls. This is the lower cascade. The trail to Virginia Falls is above and around this area and past the smaller upper cascade. The trail wanders a bit and passes yet another really nice cascade. Eventually, the trail leads to the 80-foot-high Virginia Falls. Even on a cold and rainy day like this, the hike is well worth the effort. The 6-mile round trip took me just a few hours to experience 3 magnificent falls and those beautiful cascades. And by the way, many photographers prefer to shoot on cloudy days like these because of the flat lighting. Glacier is a great place, but it's pretty darn remote, and you're going to need a place to stay. In this segment, I'll show you all the options in the park and where they are. It's a big park, and you're going to want to stay pretty close to where you want to play. I'll cover everything from campgrounds to cabins to motels, and of course the historic lodges. You'll even see how fire threatens them. About 2 million people visit Glacier National Park each year. They come for the spectacular scenery, the wildlife, and perhaps a chance to experience the early 1900s version of luxury. There are few high-end resorts in this part of Montana. There are moderately priced hotels on the west side of the park, and there's 1 or 2 on the east side. But if you want to avoid a long drive to a trailhead each day, you'll have to stay in the park. But to stay in the park, you'll have to plan ahead, as rooms and campgrounds are booked months in advance. The largest hotels are historic beauties, built by the Great Northern Railway. They have floors that creak, walls that are thin, no televisions, and beautiful lobbies, with very slow Wi-Fi. They are so remote that lodging is available only about 100 days per year. In the early 1900s, the first tourists got here by taking the Great Northern Railroad. They arrived at either East or West Glacier. They toured the park on horseback. At the end of each day's ride, they stayed in tents or small chalets built by the railroad. But those accommodations weren't quite good enough for the wealthy Easterners who tended to take these trips. So the Great Northern began building large modern hotels in spectacular places. These hotels are much the same today as they were when they were built around 100 years ago. The rooms are basic by today's standards. If you're expecting features and amenities that you would find in any major city hotel, well, you're going to be disappointed. Here there are few modern conveniences to isolate you from the natural wonder that surrounds you. Wi-Fi is a recent offering, but it's slow and only available in the lobby. You should also expect your cell phone not to work unless you're near Apgar on the east side. Today you can still arrive by train at East Glacier. You'll disembark in front of the Glacier Park Lodge in the southeast corner of the park. It was built around a century ago by the Great Northern Railroad on the Blackfeet Reservation just outside the park boundary. Red buses provide tours, and there's a shuttle bus service to the rest of the park. There are 161 guest rooms, a restaurant, a bar, and even an espresso stand. The gift shop features local Blackfeet crafts. Back in the day, this was a destination hotel. So there's an outdoor swimming pool, a 9-hole golf course, a 9-hole pitch and putt course, and a day spa. The lobby is impressive. 60 40-foot-long timbers support the multi-story structure. The timbers were all several hundred years old when cut, and they retain their bark, which apparently is hard to do. If you're looking to save a little money, or if you just can't live without a TV, you may want to stay in one of the few motels in the nearby town of East Glacier, where rental cars are also available. A few minutes down the road, there's another place to stay. It's in the Two Medicine area. Experienced backpackers will tell you that the best multi-day hikes in the park begin here. There are also great day hikes here. Some of the trailheads, like the one to Twin Falls, is on the other side of the lake, so you have to take a boat to get there. There's also a small motel called a Motor Inn and a campground. The 45-minute drive through rolling prairie along the east side park boundary weaves its way to the Many Glacier area and the aptly named Many Glacier Hotel. The 5-story Swiss-style hotel opened in 1915. The surrounding mountains reminded many of the Alps, so the lodge was built in the Alpine Swiss style. The Great Northern Railway promoted it as one of the most noteworthy tourist hotels ever erected in America. Located on Swift Current Lake, the Many Glacier Hotel is the largest in the park, with 214 guest rooms. In keeping with the era in which it was built, the rooms offer old-world charm. One of the few modern items in the hotel is an ATM in the lobby. The hotel offers a bar, fine dining with a lake view, and nightly entertainment provided with the help of a grand piano and from time to time a local folk singer. The Many Glacier area is a day hiker's paradise, and once again, this is my favorite part of the park. Many of the most popular trails in the park are here. It's also a great place to see wildlife. If you've come this far to see bears, this is the place to see them. And moose also live in the area. You may even see a porcupine. If you don't need the big lobby and you're really here just for hiking, you may want to stay about a mile down the road at the Swift Current Motor Inn and Cabins. The Motor Inn's rooms are larger and slightly more modern than the standard rooms in the hotel. And different types of cabins are available, and they have been updated more recently. They might be too basic for you, so be sure to ask for what they include. For example, is there hot water? Is there a bathroom? But if you're here for the trails, do you really need that stuff? There are public bathrooms and showers just a few yards away near the public laundry. The campground is across the parking lot. It accepts RVs and tent campers, but the spaces fill up quickly, so plan ahead. The lobby of the Motor Inn is functional. It adjoins a restaurant with an Italian theme. It's moderately priced, generally healthy, reasonably tasty, and they have pizza. The Swift Current Camp Store is well equipped and even has bear spray. And it has reasonably priced items and local favorites like Huckleberry's soft serve ice cream. Even if you're not a hiker, there is much to do here. Every night in the Swift Current parking lot, there's a wildlife spotting party. As animals feed on the mountainside, a ranger's spotting scope lets you see them up close. Often you'll see bears. This day there were bighorn sheep on one slope and mountain goats on the opposite slope. Each evening near the campground there's an informative ranger talk. I've heard many of these and they're always interesting. There's another ranger talk at the Many Glacier Hotel. That one often features a slideshow. Moose live in the area and feed in nearby Fisher Cap Lake nearly every night, and it's just a 5-minute walk from the parking lot. Bears also feed on berries in the area, so be careful. During the day, there are boat tours, canoes, and kayaks can be rented, but if you want a sailboard, you'll have to bring your own. If photography is your thing, Many Glacier is for you. The sunrise in front of the Many Glacier Hotel is one of the best you will ever see. The trails provide access to spectacular scenery. These images were all taken on trails in this area. If you're going to spend a few days in the park, at least one of them should be spent in the Many Glacier area. Now that I've covered the east side of the park, it's time to head west. The Going to the Sun Road bisects the park at the town site of St. Mary. About the only thing that's really there is a gas station, a grocery store, and a hotel, the St. Mary's Lodge and Resort. The lodge is now owned by the park's properties. The road is one of the most beautiful drives in the country. Stunning scenery and many trailheads are found along its 52 miles. Several trails are within easy walking distance of the Rising Sun Motor Inn, cabins, and campground, and it's near the east entrance. The rooms and cabins are similar to those found at Swift Current. They are simple, basic, and comfortable. The cabins are tucked away in the woods, and they're a step up from those at Swift Current. There's also a camp store and a restaurant. And by the way, I've stayed in all of these rooms, and they've every place I've mentioned so far. This is another great place for photography. It's where the prairie meets the mountains, and where elk graze in the morning. And Wild Goose Island is just up the road. It's an amazing spot. A little further down the road are trailheads to several waterfalls. So when you're looking for an adventure near the Going to the Sun Road on the east side of the park, consider the Rising Sun Motor Inn. Okay, now let's cross over the divide and check out the accommodations on the park's west side. A few buildings on the west shore of Lake McDonald make up the town site of Apgar. Remember, this is a place where your cell phone might just work. Apgar has restaurants, shops, and other services, including a campground. The Apgar Inn is similar to the other inns in the park, and it sits on the shore of the largest lake in the park, Lake McDonald. About 10 miles west on the Sun Road is the only historic hotel on the west side. It's Lake McDonald Lodge. The 3.5-story structure is on the eastern shore of Lake McDonald, and it opened in 1914. This smaller lobby is one of its best features. It's a 3-story open space supported by structural timbers, and a large fireplace covers one wall. The lodge has 100 guest rooms, cottages, and a motor inn. There's, of course, a gift shop, camp store, lounge, restaurant, and from here red bus tours, boat cruises, and other activities are available. In 2018, several cabins and other privately owned residences near the lodge and around the eastern shore of Lake McDonald were destroyed by fire. The Howe fire grew rapidly and forced the evacuation and early closing of the lodge and surrounding properties. There's still one more hotel to tell you about. It's just north of the border. In 1932, Glacier and Canada's Waterton National Park teamed up to form the first international peace park. It's here where the Great Northern Railroad built the Prince of Wales Hotel, in an amazing spot. This hotel has a spot of British sophistication, including high tea. Lake Waterton straddles the U.S.-Canada border. A cruise can take you to the outpost called Goat Haunt on the U.S. side of the border. Other water activities are available on Lake Cameron, about 20 minutes away. Even if you don't stay here, the setting of the hotel is one that you soon won't forget. Glacier is my favorite national park, and I've been to most of them. I prefer to visit around the 1st of September, when the crowds and temperatures tend to be, well, a little bit more moderate. But the end of the season is much more likely to be impacted by forest fires. In 2017 and 2018, fires kept me away. I've been in the park 4 times when there have been fires nearby, and I've seen the devastation as well as the rebirth. In 2003, I was there when the North Ridge above Lake McDonald burned. Since then, the remaining dead trees were turning gray and drying out and just waiting to burn. In August 2018, a storm brought several lightning strikes and several fires. In the next few days, the wind picked up and the fire quickly grew as I watched from home on the park's webcam. The air quality in Lake McDonald area got very bad, and much of the park was evacuated. Lake McDonald Lodge was closed for the season, and several private historic park buildings were destroyed. Do a YouTube search and you can see just how bad it was. This was the second bad fire year in a row. In 2017, the historic Sperry Chalet was gutted by fire. It was the only lodge in the park that I had never visited. But private donations are helping to reconstruct it. When you're out here, you can't help but be humbled by the beauty and the power of nature. It's why I prefer to stay in the park, where you're surrounded by it. And it's easy to forget that, well, destruction is part of the process. It's a part of nature. Only then can things be reborn and start anew. And there's no better place to watch this process than from one of the park lodges. I've been to the park more times than I can count, and I've been to all of these places. But my favorite place to stay is the Swift Current Motor Inn in the Many Glacier area. When I was younger, I preferred the Swift Current cabins, but I'm a little too old for that these days. But the setting here is incredible, and my favorite trailheads are just yards away. And by the way, from a practical point of view, the motor inns and cabins tend to be more quiet than the rooms in the lodges, and a good night's sleep is always nice before a long hike. The spectacular vistas and valleys in the park were all carved by glaciers. If trends continue, many of the remaining glaciers will all but disappear by the year 2020. But you can get close to one now by hiking the Grinnell Glacier Trail. The trailhead is located down the road from the Many Glacier Hotel. But if you want to shorten the hike by about 3 miles, take the boat. Even then, the hike is a strenuous one. In about 4 miles, you'll climb from 4,900 feet to 6,600 feet above sea level. Tickets for the boat ride and ranger-led hike sell out quickly, so it's a good idea to purchase your tickets a day or so in advance. The boat leaves from the dock behind the Many Glacier Hotel. During the lake crossing, a ranger describes the scenery. Then there's a 5-minute walk to Lake Josephine, where another boat awaits. Those who start from the trailhead emerge from the trees near Lake Josephine's boat dock. They then follow the trail along the northern shore. The weather can change rapidly near the Continental Divide, and on this September morning, frost covered the gangway. After the hike, when the boat picked us up, the temperature was near 70. Ranger hikes begin with a talk about safety. This is bear country, and bears have the right of way. We learn the best way to avoid a bear encounter is to make noise. When a bear hears a human voice, it will likely get out of the way. But if you surprise a bear, it's likely to be unhappy, and you may have to use your bear spray to fend them off. The trail heads into the woods on a boardwalk over marshy ground. Just a few hundred yards from the boat landing, the climb begins. The trail gains a few hundred feet in the first 30 minutes, and on most days, the wind grows stronger. Soon your efforts pay off with amazing views of Mount Gould, which dominates the head of the valley. On ranger-led hikes, you'll have plenty of time to rest, as you learn about local geology, wildlife, or any subject in which the ranger is fluent. This ranger is into geology. She tells us sediments which make up the rock of this trail are very old. The layers were laid down hundreds of millions of years, even before dinosaurs existed. Right next to the trail, there's evidence of the powerful forces which bent the rock and formed these mountains. Recently, rangers have had to explain one more thing: why so many trees in the area are dying. The answer is an infestation of a boring beetle and a budworm that feasts on new growth. The climb continues, and depending on the season, the foliage gets more colorful. Hundreds of millions of years ago, this entire area was under an ocean. This is fossilized seafloor. You can still see the ripples. It's now about 6,000 feet above sea level. There's a gentle rise over the next mile and a half, bringing Salamander Glacier into view, which is just above our destination. The saddle is reachable from the other side of the mountains via the Highline Trail. There are fewer trees the higher up you go, and the views of beautiful lower Grinnell Lake get better and better. The lake gets its vibrant turquoise color from small rock particles that were scraped off by the glacier. There are other trails in the area. A trail on the opposite side of the valley leads to Piegan Pass. Bears aren't the only mammals on the trail. This little guy will attempt to get your food, but don't let him. In this section, Lower Grinnell Lake is a constant welcome companion. The scale of the scenery is hard to capture in a camera. Somewhere on that rock face is the trail. In a few minutes, you're beside another cliff face. In many places, the trail is little more than a narrow shelf carved into the rock. There are a number of waterfalls on the trail, but even in this remote location, parasites may be present, so water must be filtered before drinking. The glacier is now only about a mile away, and there's a small clearing. If this were midsummer, it would be filled with blooming beargrass. After the clearing, it gets steeper. It's a single track, wide enough for only one to pass at a time. Then there's an outcrop that provides one of the best views in the park. At one point, it's so steep that stairs are cut into the rock. Soon, you can hear the waterfall at the end of the valley, and there's another incredible view. Depending on your speed, you've been on the trail for 2 to 3 hours by this point, and you've climbed about 1,200 feet, so you need to be reasonably fit. Or an 8-year-old boy accompanied by his rightfully very proud father. Grinnell Glacier is one of the most studied in the park. This lot is a U.S. Geological Survey team. At times, the trail can be quite narrow. Walking it may look perilous on camera, but it's not. Soon you can hear the waterfall. Eventually, this meltwater will flow all the way to the Arctic Ocean. The trail was built in the early 1900s, but the first explorers bushwhacked their way up here in the 1850s. Back then, the ice extended all the way to the fall. Turn around to see where you've come, and you'll see the U-shaped signature of a glacier-carved valley and a string of aquamarine lakes. The boat dock, where we started, is at the near end of the second lake. Bears like this part of the trail because it's lined with berries. Ripe thimbleberries actually taste pretty good. Just before the rest area is the best view of the formation called the Angel's Wing. It looks like half the mountain was sheared off, and it was, by a glacier that once filled this valley. The rest area is a large open area with benches and a pit toilet. It's about 0.3 to 0.4 of a mile from the top of the trail. The hardest part of the hike is still to come, so this is a good place to stop, rest, have lunch, and maybe add a layer of clothing. Bighorn sheep frequently graze in the nearby meadow. This video was shot on a different day. If you're lucky enough to see a bighorn, remember that they are wild and unpredictable. The hike up the moraine to the Grinnell Glacier overlook is steep. It rises almost 400 feet, and for many, it's the most strenuous part of the trail. When you're at the top, 4 miles from the boat dock, you may be tired, but the views are well worth the effort. If you're lucky, you may see a bighorn sheep up here too. Few continue to the glacier. Most just rest here and take in the amazing scenery. The glacier itself is still about a half mile away. Some even cool their feet in the very cold water. There's much to take in. The rock face is 3,000 feet high, the waterfall nearly 1,000. Like Lower Grinnell Lake, the water here gets its striking color from glacial flour, scraped off by the glacier. Most of those who make it up here know that the glacier is shrinking, and they want to see it before it's gone. This film crew is from Japanese television. As glaciers die, crevasses form near the edge, or foot of the glacier. Ice then breaks off and becomes a berg. Bergs now cover much of the upper Grinnell Lake. Over time, some of the bergs turn on their side, revealing ice layers that are hundreds of years old. Layers are also visible on the wall of the arête. They were laid down over 1 billion years ago. This is Salamander Glacier. In the early 1900s, it was connected to Grinnell Glacier. Today, the two glaciers are separated by hundreds of feet of rock. After a U.S. Geological Survey crew visited the glacier in 2008, they learned that it was shrinking even faster than thought. It will likely stop moving and thus lose its glacier status by the year 2020. To get to the glacier, you'll have to cross a stream. I've seen just how fast the ice is melting. When I was here in 1995, the glacier was about 500 feet longer than it is today. Back then there were still small ice caves, and the rangers were giving tours on the ice. As this 2010 video shows, the ice is now thin and flat. In fact, it's far too thin to walk on safely. Glacier melt isn't always bad news. In the 1930s, ice covered this spot. When it melted, it revealed 1.4 billion, that's with a B, year-old fossils of what was once the Earth's dominant species. These are stromatolite fossils. These humble algae colonies are responsible for giving the Earth its breathable oxygen. Before them, the atmosphere was carbon dioxide, but their waste gas was oxygen. They were formed in warm, shallow seas, proof that this ice-covered mountaintop was once a tropical shoreline. By now, you might be wondering what sort of effort is required to reach this spot. So I asked hiker Tim Curry about his thoughts.
And that last 4/10 of a mile was a little steeper than I expected.
So was the effort worth the view?
It was absolutely worth it. I would recommend this to anybody who's of sound limb, but I wouldn't recommend it to anybody who was not quite in shape for the mountain, because you do feel the altitude. It is a steep climb, it's very rocky, and you should be in shape for it.
And fitness clearly is not based on age. This grandma did it, and she's
77.
And she didn't take the boat. She started from the trailhead, 5.5 miles away. It took her 4 hours to get here. And what did she think of it?
Ah, it's marvelous.
The Grinnell Glacier Trail is one of the most scenic in North America, and one of the few that follows a glacial valley past stunning vistas with an incredible lake, and then ends at a remnant of the last ice age. This is more than a beautiful place. It's also a great place to learn something about geology, the earliest forms of life, and climate change. So when you're in Glacier National Park, if you do only one hike, the Grinnell Glacier Trail is the one to do. The Iceberg Lake Trail is a popular day hike in the Mini Glacier area. It's a moderately easy hike of 9.4 miles with only 1,200 feet of elevation gain. It features nice views of the surrounding valley, a small waterfall, and it ends at Iceberg Lake, which is surrounded on 3 sides by 3,000-foot cliffs. The trailhead is behind the Swift Current Motor Inn. The trail begins with a steep 200-plus foot climb until it meets the main trail. Take it to the left. You're now high enough to see the surrounding valley and its prime bear habitat. The trail climbs gradually, occasionally traversing a grove of trees. But most of the time, you're above the trees, where there's nothing to obstruct the views of the valley. When entering a grove, it's particularly important to make noise as a standard bear precaution. This was the first day the trail was opened, after weeks of closure due to bear activity. This is bear scat. It's proof that the bear threat is real. It takes less than an hour and a half to walk the 2.5 miles with 700 feet of elevation gain to Ptarmigan Falls. They aren't much to look at when the water is low, as it was on this day. But there are plenty of places to sit and to take a breather. It's a great place to get to know your fellow hikers. This couple is from Massachusetts. They wanted to see some wildlife.
Where Susie finally got to see a grizzly. That was her goal. She wanted to see a grizzly.
From a distance, we went
Yeah, we wanted to see them from a distance. That's right, not up close and personal.
They didn't know it, but very soon they would see another. And this time, it wouldn't be from a distance. After the falls, the trail is in the trees. Soon you come to an intersection. The trail to the right rises another 1,700 feet to the Ptarmigan Tunnel and the amazing view on the other side. The trail to the lake goes straight. A few minutes later, I saw a group heading back down the trail. I recognized many of them from the picnic area at the falls. Why were they heading this way so rapidly? Some were nervously smiling, but nobody would stop their retreat to tell me. Soon I joined the retreat. Eventually, I did learn that a mama bear and 2 cubs were also using the trail. One hiker took these pictures and some video with a little point-and-shoot camera. Usually, bears will try to avoid humans. These blocked the trail and headed towards them. They got quite close. This is potentially a very dangerous situation. They were very lucky. The mama was only interested in teaching her kids how to find and eat berries. I and others had bear spray, but none of us wanted to have to use it. After several minutes of backtracking, we saw another group coming. The lady in orange is a trail tour guide, leading a group from the Boston area. We all felt that she knew best how to handle the situation. Then someone came up and said he saw the bears leave the trail and go up the hill. So we decided we could continue, but we did so as one large group. There is safety in numbers. Secretly, I'm sure all of us were checking out the others in the group, trying to determine who was the slowest, while at the same time hoping that an old joke wouldn't come true. 15 minutes later, in a clearing, one hiker showed us her photos of the bear. She was quite close to it. I've seen what happens when a bear attacks, on this very trail, and it's not pretty. The victim I saw in 1994 struggled down the trail, covered in blood. This witness explains what he saw.
I saw him. He has a deep laceration on the top of his head, one across the chest and one on the back.
It would have taken the victim 3 or 4 hours to get to the nearest hospital by car, and by then it might be too late. So a helicopter was called. In the next week, he had to endure 4 operations, but he did survive. Youthful enthusiasm can be nothing more than naivete. This time, we were lucky, but the danger was real, and the trail was again closed the next day. The trail continues to rise very gently, and it never feels like you're climbing, until the last little bit just before the lake. The trail then descends to the lake. The bergs that gave it its name are long gone, but it's still an amazing sight. Including rest stops, it took about 3.5 hours to get here. The icebergs that gave the lake its name are long gone, but it's still an amazing sight. The lake is surrounded on 3 sides by 3,000-foot cliffs. Numerous rocks provide plenty of space for even our large group to spread out and enjoy the quiet of the place. I stayed for about an hour, taking photos and fending off squirrels. We again grouped up for the hike down. It took less than 2.5 hours. Recently, rules have changed to allow the carriage of handguns on the trails. One of our group had one, and I was glad for it. The Iceberg Trail is a popular day hike because it's an easy 9+ mile stroll. It's a great first day hike before taking on something a little more challenging. It offers a wonderful view of an alpine valley, and of course the amazing one-of-a-kind Iceberg Lake. The Trail of the Cedars is one of the most visited in Glacier National Park, in part because it's located near the more popular west entrance. It's also popular because it's only a 0.7 mile hike, and it goes through an amazing old-growth cedar rainforest, which contrasts dramatically from the alpine sections of most of the park. A boardwalk winds its way past large trees and plentiful ground growth. But the highlight for me is the gorge carved by Avalanche Creek. It's one of those places where I tend to just silently watch. It's amazing that water carved all this through solid rock, and the results are impeccably beautiful. The best time to come is after a recent rain, and that's when this HD video was shot. The rain really brings out the vibrant color of the red rock and the green moss, which provides plenty of contrast with the crystal clear waters of Avalanche Creek. Since the last ice age thousands of years ago, water and the silted carries carved these intricate shapes and curves. In places, the creek is remarkably narrow. A spur trail to Avalanche Lake takes you above the gorge, where it's easy to imagine how the gorge was formed. I shot this video in September. I can't help but wonder how much more violent the flow is in the spring, during the snowmelt, when all the snow that's high up in the mountains melts and flows down this valley. It's easy to understand why the parking spaces for the Trail of the Cedars fill up quickly. But if you get here before 10, like I did, you just might have the whole place to yourself. In this segment, we'll cover the 15.2 miles of the very popular, and with good reason, Highline Trail. The trailhead is at Logan Pass. We'll start by traversing the Garden Wall. 3.5 miles later, we'll climb the formation called the Haystack. At the halfway point, we'll get refreshed at Granite Park Chalet. Then we'll cross the Continental Divide and take in the view that makes this hike special. Then we'll hike down 2,300 feet past several lakes to the journey's end at the Swift Current Motor Inn. The trailhead is across the Sun Road from the Logan Pass parking lot. A signpost reminds us that more than 15 miles will be hiked before dinner tonight. This is bear country. There are more than 500 grizzlies in the park, and as the sign says, there is no guarantee of your safety. With an incredible view of the valley below, the trail drops quickly 200 feet to a shelf blasted into the several thousand-foot high Garden Wall. It's so narrow that you have to stop to let other hikers by. It may seem scary, but it's not. In part because there's a handy garden hose-covered safety cable to cling to. The trail is hundreds of feet above the Sun Road at this point, so you can still hear the traffic as it winds its way down the valley. It's not until you get off the shelf and look back that you see just how massive the cliff face is. But it's the view across the valley where you will most likely cast your gaze. Soon, you're off the cliff face, and the trail opens up a bit. Bears aren't the only wildlife feeding here. Bighorn sheep like it too. Across the valley, the 492-foot Birdwoman Falls comes into view. The trail cuts across the safety of a scree field. Then you're back in the trees where bear precautions are necessary. Some wear bells on their boots, but most rangers think they're not loud enough. Talking, singing, or generally making noise is deemed the best way to let a bear know that you're coming. Some of the smaller creatures of the park may come out in hopes that you'll toss them a crumb or two. But don't. It's best to keep wild animals wild. The trail continues along the garden wall, and by now you can no longer hear the road below. It's only natural to spend most of your time looking down the trail. But the view up is also impressive. This is a place where you can truly be surrounded by the magnificence of Mother Nature. It's easy to understand why the big mountain in the distance is called Heaven's Peak. At this point, we're only about an hour from Logan Pass, and you can see some amazing scenery without too much effort, and you can turn around whenever you want. Again, you never know what you're going to see on the Highline Trail. Here, a mountain goat family grazes next to the trail. Now, these goats may seem cute and docile, and most of the time they are. But they, like all wild animals, are unpredictable, and it's best to keep your distance. The trail is pretty flat for the next 1.5 miles. The view is anything but. There are few trees or fellow hikers this far out, and now it's just you and the mountains. At about the 3-mile point, there's another grove of trees, beyond which there's another shelf carved into another cliff face. If you don't have the time to do the whole trail, this is a great place to stop and take in the scenery before heading back. Notches in the cliff make excellent picnic spots. They're a great place to take in the McDonald Valley, while resting up for the several hundred-foot climb up the Haystack. This is also a great place to interact with other trail users. Most are friendly, but some will insist that you get out of their way. It seems here even wildlife enjoy the incredible panorama. When you see hikers heading the opposite way, it's a good idea to ask them if they've seen anything up ahead.
Any sheep or anything over there?
There are 3 nice big rams right up here on this side.
The cliff face is only a couple hundred yards long. Then there was a clearing. In this case, bighorn were grazing in the clearing. Bighorn sheep are the symbol of the park, and it's a treat to see just one. And you're really lucky when you see several doing what bighorn do. The open space and lush grass attracts other grazers as well. Here, predators such as bears can be seen with plenty of time to get out of the way. However, some grazers think it's safer on the rocky ledges. Well, usually they're right. But seconds before this video was shot, this bear was chasing a goat. The goat got away. Bears are omnivores. That means they'll eat just about anything. They also can be territorial. This mama bear has a cub, and when she finds an area with plenty of her favorite food, berries, she'll defend the area for her family. These bears are about 1,000 feet above the trail, but these animals can run at 35 miles an hour. And when you see a grizzly heading your way and you're 90 minutes away from the nearest road and a few hours away from any medical help, you're glad that you're not the slowest person on the trail. Luckily, this bear was just checking us out. Right about here, the crew had a little problem. This was the last shot we got with the HD camera, but we were prepared, at least a little bit. The rest of the hike was shot with our standard definition backup camera. The climb to the haystack is about 250 feet, over 2 switchbacks. About 10 minutes later, we were at the top. That's Heaven's Peak in the distance, and McDonald Creek to the left. Here, there's evidence of an old forest fire. In the distance, you can see a large burn area from 2003, when dry conditions and lightning strikes caused fires that burned much of the park. After rounding a bend at the 6-mile point, Granite Park is visible. It's a welcome sight, because you can purchase something to drink and even a snack to augment your personal supply. Before you get to the lodge, there's a spur trail to the Grinnell Glacier overlook. If you decide to take the trail, it will add about 1.2 miles to the hike and another 1,000 feet of up and down. This is the view from the overlook. You are standing exactly on the Continental Divide. It's a lot of work to get up here, but the view is spectacular. The chalet is the halfway point. It's about 7.5 miles from Logan Pass. It's a good place to rest and to meet fellow hikers. More importantly, you can buy water and food here. This is also one place where you might actually get cell phone coverage. Oddly, the shop contains a fridge, but there is no electricity. Also oddly, the prices are reasonable. But there's no trash collection here, so you have to pack out whatever you purchased. The chalet also provides primitive accommodations. You have to supply your own bedding and provide and cook your own meals. The trail to the pass leads past the bunkhouse. Several trails meet here, and a signpost will point you in the right direction. There's a 500-foot climb to Swift Current Pass, and you may be sharing the trail with a few bighorn sheep. After 8 miles, and this latest climb to 7,200 feet, you may get a little tired. But it's all downhill from here. But going downhill, as we said, is actually harder on the body than going uphill, as I was soon reminded. I was very close, hurt my right knee. Perhaps due to being tired or my painful knee, well, I was in need of a boost. And I got one. Tiredly? I'll explain. Well, that's what I came to see. This view. And I was tired. Didn't expect that last bit of up, 500 feet or so of up. But the view is beginning to be there. And I can't wait to get a little further down the road. Feeling better, heart rate's getting back down to 125. Nice cool breeze in my back. Sunny, it's a good day. After 9 miles, I'm approaching the view I've come to see. It's amazing. I'm at over 7,000 feet, looking 2,000 feet down a valley carved by a glacier 12,000 years ago, leaving behind a chain of beautiful lakes. In addition, I can faintly hear the sound of 3,000-foot waterfalls. This is a special place. There's no other way to see this. You have to hike here. You'll have to endure exhaustion, blisters, and pain. While hauling yourself, your food and water, and your cameras for 8 hours just to see this. They say that you appreciate things more when you earn them, and they're right. After crossing yet another shelf, you're close to the falls. If anything, the view only gets better. The falls begin at a hidden melting glacier. This trickle will soon join others to form the Swift Current River. Several wide-eyed minutes later, I'm on the valley floor. I look back and realize that this meltwater is just starting a journey that will end in the Arctic Ocean. In 10 to 20 years, the glacier will be gone, and this stream bed will be dry for much of the summer, causing local wildlife to look elsewhere for this vital fluid that we all take too much for granted. Almost daily, bears use this trail to cross the divide, so you need to be alert. That was dried bear scat. Temporary suspension bridges help you cross a couple of creeks. At this point, I'm not stopping as often to look at the scenery, but I made an exception at Red Rock Falls. It's just a short walk off the main trail. It also means I'm only 1.8 miles from the end of the trail. This is the last large lake on the trail, and while it would be nice to stay and appreciate it, I do so only briefly. It's been a long day, and I'm much more interested in basking in the luxury of a sparse, TV-less room with my boots off. Several minutes later, 8 hours after starting out, and carrying a lifetime of memories with me, that's what I did. When you're looking for a moderate hike in Glacier, consider hiking up to Piegan Pass via the Sun Road trailhead. The trail begins by following the creek. The well-traveled trail then doubles back as it climbs. The trail crosses a creek several times. On a hot sunny day, the shade from the trees may be welcome, but the forest is dense and the views of the mountaintops are few. Every once in a while, though, a peak will poke through. Wildlife seem to like this wooded area also, so it's very important to be alert. And yes, this is bear country. On this early September day, bear scat sightings were nearly as frequent as creek crossings, so common bear precautions must be taken. For the most part, you're surrounded by trees, and the canopy is dense, covering the trail. The trail is very heavily tree-lined. A few trails intersect with this one, and the Park Service has done a good job of providing easy-to-follow signs to point you in the right direction. Just after the last fork in the trail, at about the 3-mile point, the trail opens up. The nearby mountain peaks are no longer obstructed. And to me, this is the interesting part. For about a quarter of a mile, the track runs parallel to the ridge and over a scree field. By now, most of the climbing is over. There's only about 300 more vertical feet to the pass. The fascinating thing about this section is, well, because it's so open, the brain doesn't quite know what to make of it. I ran into one couple who had enough before even crossing half the scree field. When I asked why, they said, well, they couldn't really explain it, but they both had this odd and overexposed feeling, so they decided to turn around. Walking on the scree is easy. The slope of the trail is gentle, and the side slope isn't steep. Of course, I'm right next to a glacier. Walking on this thing is actually not difficult. It's just that it's a little stressful and that it's kind of vertigo-y. It's so tall and high and wide and big. The West is big. So why do people get this odd feeling? Well, it's probably because all of the visual reference points are so far away. The straight as an arrow trail is over a mile long. The ridge up the slope is a few thousand feet above. The road is miles away and 1,500 feet below. And the opposite peaks are several miles away. There's simply no reference points. I've hiked the Highline Trail many times, and in places it's only about 3 feet wide, and I've never had a feeling like I have here. So the only thing I can think of is it must be the distance, the reference points. It just throws your body out of whack. But to me, this was the most enjoyable part of the trail. After 30 minutes, you're off the scree. A few hundred more yards, and you're to the pass. Well, folks, here we are. Piegan Pass. 2 hours and 20 minutes or so to walk up. 1,700 feet, 4.5 miles. And this is the view. It's not bad. You know, the lake down there is probably the coolest thing. For a minute, I thought about climbing one. The small blue lake was an interesting reminder that this pass was covered by ice not all that long ago. At a slow pace and allowing for plenty of time to take photos and shoot this video, it took less than 2.5 hours to get to the pass. It took about an hour and a half to get back down. After a little exploring and a lunch break, it was time to head back down the Piegan Pass Trail. The day of the hike, the temperature was in the mid-50s. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. The next day, as the weather tends to do in the mountains, things had changed. A few inches of snow had fallen, and fog obscured the trail. This segment describes the hike to the Ptarmigan Tunnel from the Melting Glacier area. The first 2.5 miles rises just about 700 feet until the Ptarmigan Falls. From there, the trail climbs another 1,000 feet in 1.5 miles to Ptarmigan Lake. The final push is a 600-foot, 1-mile climb to the tunnel and the amazing view on the other side. The trail is shared by the Iceberg Lake Trail, and the trailhead is located behind the Swift Current Motor Inn parking lot at about 5,300 feet. The footage from here to the falls was taken the day I hiked to Iceberg Lake, as I used a better camera. The steady climb is mostly out of the trees, with nice views of the surrounding mountains. The area is frequented by bears, so make noise and practice other bear safety precautions. The temperature was in the 40s, and the sky was threatening on this early September day. One of my favorite things about hiking in Glacier is the tree line is pretty low, and you're often hiking above it. So here you get to see the mountains, not just a bunch of trees. The trail does go through a few groves, and in one of them there was some bear scat. If you haven't seen bear scat before, you need to know what it looks like. Big pile of bear scat. This pile is a bit old, so hopefully the bear left the area. This was the first day the trail had been open in weeks because of bear activity. It was closed the next day for the same reason. And if you see bear scat, be alert. These folks were heading to the Iceberg Lake, but now they're retreating because a mama bear and 2 of her cubs were using the trail. I got this footage from a hiker who got out of the way and shot some phone footage of the bear family. This footage was responsible for closing the trail the next day. Bear activity frequently closes this trail, so if it's open, do it, because it might be closed tomorrow. The bears were seen heading safely into the woods, so the group turned around again and headed back to Iceberg. The first leg of the trail ends at Ptarmigan Falls, and here they are. And in case you're wondering how long it took a 50-year-old man to get there, Ptarmigan Falls took an hour and 2 minutes or so to get here. Well, the falls are nice, but not spectacular, especially when the water is this low. But it's a good place to have a snack and rest before the steepest part of the trail. Not far from the bridge, there's a side trail with a signpost pointing to the Ptarmigan Tunnel. The Ptarmigan Trail goes to the right and up the slope. And I knew this was going to be a tough hike. It's 2,300 feet up from the trailhead. So on this leg of the journey, I decided to take the lightest camera I owned at the time. It wasn't a very good camera, so I shot some stills too. The weather kept changing, and while there were clearings, much of the trail is in dense forest, which makes it easier to surprise a bear. And after about an hour or so, I was well above tree line and in a cirque. There was also a hole next to the trail, which was recently dug, probably by a bear. Here's some of the bad video of the cirque in Ptarmigan Lake.
Miles away.
It was drizzling and getting colder, and one reason I'm showing you this shot is just to point out how quickly cameras have gotten better. The camera used here isn't that old, but it uses an obsolete technology called videotape. Today, cell phones have much better cameras. And the switchbacks may look like they're cut into a sheer cliff wall, but they weren't too bad. It took only 20 minutes to climb the remaining 600 vertical feet to the tunnel. Here are my first impressions.
Okay, 2 hours, 48 minutes. Heart rate 119. It was 140 so when coming up this hill. Last bit is 600 feet of up. There's the switchbacks in the trails. Not fun. Started out 5.2 miles that way. Started raining at the bottom of the lake, or halfway up the lake. There's the tunnel. It's cold, it's raining. It's cold, it's raining, I'm here. Tired. But the view's not bad. It's not bad. I'm not sure it's worth all this effort, but I've finally been here and I've done it.
My disappointment wouldn't last for long. This is the tunnel. It's only about 60 feet long. And the day before, it was occupied by a bear who was using it as a shelter. But this is the view from the other side. It definitely made this trip worth all the effort. The rapidly changing weather was a bit unnerving, but it made for very dramatic and impressive images. To the right you see red rock that was laid down in a shallow sea millions of years ago, and that's Elizabeth Lake in the valley. There were a few other hikers up there, and we discussed the situation. While I was talking to one of them, I looked down, straight down. Then I quickly snapped several pictures, and it's a good thing I did, because a few minutes later, the clouds had moved in, and visibility dropped to near zero. It was time to start thinking about getting back down safely. I took in the view for a while, but once the view had gone, there was no reason to stay. It was time to start thinking about heading down.
They said a cold front was coming through. I don't think it was coming through till tomorrow.
On the other side, the clouds were even more dramatic. They were just rolling over the 8,000-foot divide. And by the way, I was so captivated by the weather that once again I forgot to take a shot inside the tunnel. And when you're out here, you're pretty much on your own. There are no reliable weather forecasts here. And the mountains tend to make up their own weather anyway. And remember, there's no cell phone coverage, so you can't call somebody or look at a radar app on your phone. It's an interesting predicament. There are over 5 miles and 2,300 feet of potentially slippery slope to go. And the trail goes through lightning-attracting, tree-lined bear country. It's impossible to know whether it's better to wait or to go, so I just enjoy the uniqueness of the experience. It really was quite amazing. Then I had a snack and was about to head down.
It's sleeting pretty good. Cold fronts come through.
When it started to sleet.
Those people just came down.
If it continued, it would be a rather slippery descent. So once again, I had to decide, do I stay or do I go? Well, I decided to go. 45 minutes later, I was 1,300 feet lower. It was raining, and this is what I had to say.
It's 36 degrees. I'm fogging up. About 1,000 more feet down to go, about 3 miles or so, maybe 2. It's pretty cool now. It was kind of scary before.
And after the rain came the fog. The video camera kept fogging up, so I switched to the still camera again. Sometimes this hindered the view. At other times, it made it interesting. And when I got below the fog, the clouds got really interesting. I've hiked hundreds of miles in this park, and this hike was one of the most memorable. The cold, rain, sleet, and fog made it special. And I also captured one of my favorite images. I've shot thousands of images here since 1994. And in the few minutes that the valley and Highline Lake was visible, I was able to stitch together one of my favorite shots. So let's do a quick recap on the Ptarmigan Trail hike. It is one of my favorites, and the trailhead is just behind the Swift Current Motor Inn. It starts out in the open, and it's pretty easy, and then it gets quite hard on the way up. It is frequented by bears. It's often closed because of too much bear activity. So if you're here and the trail happens to be open, take it when you can. You never know when it's going to be closed, and later in the year, August, September, it's much more likely that that will happen. Glacier National Park in northwest Montana is a great place to see for yourself that the Earth's climate seems to be warming. In the 1850s, there were at least 150 glaciers in the park. In 2005, there were only 27. Officials will tell you that all of the park's glaciers will be gone by the year 2030. In 2008, I ran into a U.S. Geological Survey team on Grinnell Glacier, and they told me that most of the glaciers wouldn't even last that long. I've never been a big believer in all the fears that are associated with what most believe is man's influence on global warming. But in Glacier National Park, I've seen firsthand that the glaciers are shrinking. I've been visiting the park over Labor Day week nearly every year since 1994. On my first trip, I had to climb over ice blocks to get on Grinnell Glacier. I didn't notice any significant change to the glacier the next year, but by the end of the 90s, it was obvious that the glacier was shrinking. In the last few years, the shrinkage is, well, sadly quite noticeable. Using my photos as a reference and Google Earth to help measure distance, I determined that Grinnell Glacier has melted back about 500 feet between 1994 and 2009. The ice in the park has been melting for hundreds and probably thousands of years. The more than half-mile thick glaciers that carved these valleys disappeared 12,000 years ago. For at least the last few millennia, smaller alpine glaciers have built up and shrunk again. So even Al Gore agrees that the shrinking glaciers are nothing new. This average global temperature chart was developed by the U.S. government. It represents ice core data going back 425,000 years. The blue line represents temperature data. The red line represents CO2 levels. Notice that most of the time the Earth is significantly cooler than it is now. But every 125,000 years or so, the Earth gets warmer. These warm cycles are called interglacial periods. We're at the tail of one such warming cycle now. As you can see, there have been many temperature fluctuations in the last 5,000 years or so. So let's take a look at a more detailed chart. This chart displays global temperature data over just the last 4,500 years. There have been several warm and cool periods during this time, and the burning of fossil fuels cannot be blamed for any of the previous warm cycles. There's plenty of photographic evidence that all but a couple of glaciers are shrinking. The only glacier not shown to shrink since 1938 is Piegan. This is a 1914 photo of Jackson and Blackfoot glaciers. At the time, you couldn't tell one from the other. Today, Jackson is the largest glacier in the park, but it hasn't been connected to Blackfoot for quite some time. This 1900 Glacier National Park archive photo shows Grinnell Glacier still attached to what is now called Salamander Glacier. This 2009 photo shows what's left. The isolated horizontal patch to the right is Salamander. There is now several hundred feet of rock separating the two glaciers. Thanks again to the Glacier National Park archives, it's possible to show just how much ice has melted away from Grinnell in the last 160 years. The lines here show Grinnell's boundaries at various times. In 1850, it was well down the valley. By 1993, it had pulled back considerably. Now let's look at it from above. Here it is in 1938, 1981, 1998, and in 2009. The glacier is definitely melting. Is the cause man-made CO2 emissions, the destruction of the rainforest, or simply the natural cycles of the planet? Well, I don't know. It's probably a bit of one and a bunch of another. To me, it doesn't matter why the ice is melting. I simply know that it is. I shot this video in 1994. There were several large blocks of ice, and even a small ice cave. As this 2010 video shows, The ice is now thinner and flat. The glacier is still over 4,500 feet wide and 1,200 to 1,700 feet long. At the cliff face, it's still a few hundred feet thick. So will all the ice be gone in less than 20 years? Well, I don't know. But the glaciers might be. The U.S. Geological Survey defines a glacier as an ice mass with a surface area of at least 1/10 of a square kilometer, along with evidence that the ice is still moving. By that definition, it's not hard to believe that Grinnell will lose its glacier designation in less than 20 years. The Earth is always changing. There's plenty of evidence that since the beginning of time, the Earth has been affected by the species which dominated at the time. For most of Earth's life, there was little or no breathable oxygen. 1 billion years ago, the most advanced species at the time changed that forever. Large colonies of cyanobacteria, better known as blue-green algae, began living and dying in shallow tropical seas. They took in CO2 and gave off oxygen. Oxygen was their waste gas, their pollution. During their reign, their waste gas polluted the atmosphere to a point that they were no longer the dominant species. They changed the planet's atmosphere from one that was rich in CO2 to one that was rich in oxygen. This change influenced the climate, but more importantly, it made the rise of more advanced oxygen-breathing animals possible. As each generation of the bacteria died, they built structures called stromatolites. As it happens, the receding Grinnell Glacier has revealed some well-preserved stromatolite fossils. Hundreds of millions of years ago, this mountaintop was a tropical shoreline. The Earth is always changing, and sometimes Earth creatures, like cyanobacteria or human beings, influence change. But more often than not, far greater forces are at work. Many years ago, this area was much warmer. It was a tropical beach. Today, the glaciers are receding, and I, for one, will be very sorry to see them go. And only time will tell if man has permanently altered Earth's climate cycles. But history predicts that this interglacial period will eventually end, and thousands of years from now, the Earth will return to its more normal, low-temperature state, and ice will again fill these valleys. One of the least visited areas of the park is the northwest section. Here you'll find remote trails, beautiful lakes, off-the-grid homesteads, rafting, and surprisingly, a pretty darn good bakery. We're going to head up the North Fork Road towards Polebridge, and then beyond to Bowman Lake. You'll have to take a private vehicle to get there. You can get there from outside the park via the North Fork Road, but we're going to head out from the Atcar town site on the western end of Lake McDonald. The 11 miles of the Camas Road is surrounded by forests of different ages. A series of fires over the last 20 years are responsible for the diversity of flora and fauna. The well-maintained park road has the highest speed limit in the park, 45 miles an hour. The road ends at a fork in the road, just outside the park. Turn right on the graveled North Fork Road. It roughly follows the contours of the North Fork of the Flathead River. There are a few turnouts along the way. This one has an info sign describing the benefits of a forest fire to the ecosystem. The past fire made it easy to see the river. As this was shot in late August, there was little whitewater. Local outfitters provide transportation and guide services for what is surely a most memorable trip. After 30 to 40 minutes, you pass a few old homesteads. The area was settled about 100 years ago, and there are still a few folks who stay here year-round, though they are well off the grid. Yep, the power lines stop about 20 miles back. Today, there's a few ranches, a hostel, a few cabins, and the main attraction, Polebridge Mercantile. It's been a going concern since Bill Adair hand-cut the timber fort in 1914. His original house is next door. Today, it's the Northern Lights Saloon. The nearby clearing holds the rustic hostel, with both dorm-style and private rooms. There are even a few cabins. The kitchen and outhouses are shared. And you can even rent a canoe. Solar panels provide much of the power. A generator provides the rest. The Merc was once a general store. Since 1991, it's been an off-the-grid bakery. All the items are baked fresh on site by a staff that lives on site. Of course, t-shirts and other souvenirs are available. The place has changed little, and the handcrafted construction is on display. It stood up well against over 100 years of harsh weather. It's open year-round, but in winter, only 3 days a week. The road to Bowman heads north, past the saloon. Back in the day, this was a residential street. Most of the home sites are long gone, but you can see evidence of the old buildings, along with past forest fires. About a mile later, the road turns right to cross a bridge over the North Fork River. Almost immediately, there's a ranger station, indicating we're about to re-enter the park. From there, the park road gets rougher. A couple of yards after the park gate, there's another fork in the road. Go to the left for 14 miles, and you'll end up at the beautiful Kitla Lake. We're going to go to the right, and in 6 miles, we'll be at the equally nice Bowman Lake. The single-lane track is twisty with many blind corners. We're going only about 15 to 20 miles an hour. As a precaution, I honk the horn on particularly blind corners to alert anyone heading in the opposite direction. This was shot late in the day, and there was a time problem. We were staying at the Rising Sun Motor Inn on the other side of the park, but the Sun Road was going to close in a few hours for construction, so we wouldn't be able to stay long. About 30 minutes later, we are at a beach near the Bowman Lake campground. The water is remarkably clear, and the setting just about defines tranquil. Turns out it's a great place to canoe, too. I only wish we could have stayed longer.